Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today we begin the second half of the book of Shmuel, or otherwise known as Shmuel Bet, or Samuel 2. This is an artificial division, and traditionally this book is all one big book of Shmuel, but it is a very long book, and this is a reasonable transition point. The book 1 ended with the tragic death of the first king of the United Israel. That was King Saul. Shaul HaMelech had passed on, and this picks up where we left off with David, who was now with his followers in the city of Ziklag, which is a town which they had received from the Philistines, where David had sought refuge. Ziklag became the hometown, the home base of David and his men. And David had just went on a successful raid against the Amalekites, who had been taking advantage of the situation, taking advantage of the war between Israel and the Philistines, and raiding towns and marauding through the towns and burning down cities and so on. And David had just successfully found this band of people and gotten rid of them. And he's sitting in Ziklag at this point, knowing that a large battle is about to take place, or taking place contemporaneously up in the north at Har Gilboa. And he does not yet know what the results of that battle are going to be. David himself was marching towards that battle, but then with the Philistines in an awkward situation, which we read about before, but the Philistines didn't trust him, and they sent him back to Ziklag. So they're here. This is where we pick up the story. And Shaul had just committed suicide after being injured in battle, committed suicide rather than suffer through the being captured and presumably tortured and humiliated, etc. After asking his servant to kill him, who refused to do so, Saul fell upon his sword on his own. We read of the mourning of the people of Ephraim, who were mourning King Saul, remembering the days when he was their savior and saved them from their enemies, and all this was occurring in the north. Now we focus a little bit down towards the south, closer to where modern day Gaza is, to Ziklag, where David is waiting. Vayhi acharei mot Shaul, and it was after King Saul passed on, v'David shav mehakot et ha'amalek, and David had returned from his raid against the Amaleki. Vayeshev David b'Ziklag yamim shnayim, and David had been now in Ziklag after his return from Amalek about 2 days. Now remember, we described several times who the Amaleki were, and it's very relevant in this chapter that we're going to be reading today, and that is the understanding that the Amaleki refers to a loose band of tribes that are ethnically more or less related and are ethnic Amalekites, but these are basically bands of robbers and thieves that ran through the wilderness and the no man's land between the various civilizations of the time, would raid people as they traveled, would raise caravans and people as they traveled across the desert, and picked off towns and cities when they were in their most vulnerable states. This was the reason why the Amalekites were so important in order to establish a kingdom. It was so important to get rid of them. Bear that in mind as we read today's chapter. Vayhi bayom hashlishi, and it was on the third day. So he's back from war. 2 days. It's now day 3. Vayhine ish ba min hamachane me'im Shaul, and a man is coming from the camp that was with Saul. So a person that had been with the troops, with the soldiers as they fought with the Philistines, which in the end that they were routed, and the soldiers scattered, from the Philistines after being devastated at war. So there was a person coming, uvegadav kruim, and his clothing was torn. Vadamal rosho, there was dirt on on his head. Presumably, this is a sign of mourning, a sign of sadness, or it could have been just dirty because he was just dirty coming from war and battle and exhausted and so on. Oel David, and when he came to David, Vayipol Arza Vayishtachu, and he fell to the ground and bowed to David. This refugee, or this soldier running from battle, comes to David, falls before him. Vayomer David, and David says to him, "Amy Zetavo, where are you coming from?" Vayomer Elav, and he says, "Mi Machanei Yisrael nimlatati, I have escaped from the camp of the Israelites, from the camp, meaning the army camp of the Israelites. I have escaped from there." Vayomer Elav David, Meha Yohadavar. David said to him, "What happened there? Hagednali, please tell me what happened in that battle. What happened?" Vayomer, and he said, "Asher nos ha'am min ha'milchama," that the people ran and retreated in haste from the battle. V'gam harbei nafal minam, and many people of Israel died by Amusu, and they were killed. V'gam Shaul, and Saul himself, V'Yonatan beno, and Jonathan his son Mesu, they also died in the battle. Notably, he only mentions here Yehonatan, Jonathan, and Saul. He doesn't mention the other two sons of Saul, presumably because they were. He assumed they would be less important to David, knowing that David was a very close relationship with Yehonatan. Vayomer David al Hanara Magidlo. So David says to him, to this boy that's talking to him. Now this boy is running from the battle, so there's a lot of confusion going on in battle. And he says, Eich Yodata, how do you know Kimei Shol v'Yonatan beno? Do you have first-hand knowledge of this? Is this a rumor? Maybe he was captured. Maybe you ran and something else happened. Like, how do you know that this is actually true? Vayomer Hanar Hamagidlo. So this boy, this young man who was telling him this news, said to him, Nikro Nikresi Bihar Hal Gilboa. I happen to be on the mountain of Gilboa. It's a little bit unusual. It starts sounding a little suspicious here. I happen to be there. Now, why would someone happen to be near the king? Well, maybe it's okay. I mean, it's possible. Maybe he just, like he said, happened to be there. But it starts to sound a little fuzzy. And behold, I saw that Saul was standing there leaning upon his spear. So it seems, in other words, he was injured and he was using his spear as a support to stand. And it was clear that the chariots and the riders were approaching him closer and enclosing around him. So he was surrounded, and the enemy chariots and horsemen were getting closer and closer to Saul. And I happened to be there. Now, a brave soldier in this situation would try to valiantly defend the king, right? Even against the odds, you don't have a choice. Remember, this is the guy who ran away, so he's not exactly making himself look very good with this story. But then it gets a little weirder. So Saul turned around, and he saw that I was there. So where's everybody else? Is there no other people around? Where's Saul's sons? Where's his assistant? So this story just sounds funny. Saul's just standing alone in this story, being surrounded by enemy horsemen. It just doesn't really jive. It doesn't sound right. Yikra Eli, and he called out to me. I said, I'm here. As if, this he's been referred to as a nar, as a young man, in order to demonstrate he wasn't any sort of official. He wasn't any sort of officer. Not very high up on the pecking order. But the king calls out to him, Vayomer li, and he says to me, Mi ata, who are you? V'amar love, I said to him, Amaleki anochi, I am an Amaleki. Now that makes it even weirder. Like Saul's downfall, his weakness, and arguably Saul at this point, when he sees pretty much his life flashing before his eyes, things are about to end for him. He knows that his weakness was the Amalekites. He knows the Amaleki are the enemy that and it's because of his behavior, and it's because he did not destroy the Amalekites as he was supposed to, and that was his weakness. This is why he's suffering here. For someone to stand at this time and admit that he told the king, "I am an Amalekite," at this very point, is I don't know how to say more than this. Is just like the absolute height of I'm not sure what the right term is. Like taking the knife and driving it into Saul's heart and then twisting it, and saying, "I am an Amalekite." So here I am at the time when you're about to go down, and you're about to be taken down by the enemy. I am an Amalekite. Vayomer Elai, and he said to me, "Amodna alayu moseseni, stand over me and kill me." And which, by the way, we know, of course, we know from before we read that this is obviously not true. This is not what happened, because we know that because we know that Saul killed himself. We know exactly what happened. We know that Saul turned to his assistant, right, who was standing and fighting by his side, and said, "You kill me," and his assistant refused to do so, refused to kill the king. But this Amaleki says that this is what happened. That Saul says, "Stand over me and kill me, ki achazani hashavot," because pain and suffering has overcome me. Ki chol od nafshi bi, because there's only a little bit of my soul left in me. In other words, I'm dying. I was, and the pain and the suffering is overtaking me. Please finish me off. And I stood over him and I killed him. Now, why would this Amaleki admit this? Why would he say this story to David? There's only one logical reason that just glares out here, and that he's saying this because he thinks that because David is Saul's enemy, that David will get some sort of satisfaction out of this, and then promote this Amalekite. Yay, you were the one that killed Saul. Now you got rid of the king, and now I can be king. That's the way he's thinking. So, and the guy is completely misreading David. If anyone who's been following with us all along until now would know that the last thing David wanted was to take over the kingdom because Saul is executed. The last thing David wanted was a coup. What David was working for this entire time was a peaceful transition of power, a transition of power where Saul would not be demoted or degraded in any way, but rather, hand over the kingdom to David in an honorable, peaceful manner. This was the last thing David wanted. But this Amalekite, because of who he was and because of the kind of person he was, he just couldn't even imagine that any king would want it any other way. He'd be so happy. Yeah, I got rid of your enemy. So he made up this entire lie and this entire story simply to impress David. And we'll see soon that David wasn't very impressed. So I went ahead and I killed him. Why? Ki yadati, because I knew ki lo yichya achrei niflo. He's not going to live anyway after he had fallen in battle. He was wounded. And I took the crown that was on his head, and I took the like a bangle or a bracelet that he was wearing on his arm, and I've brought them to my master here. So here's your prize. Look, you see, you now have the king of Saul, the crown of Saul, and and his jewelry that he wore on his arm. So by bringing these items of Saul's, the crown, it did prove to David and all those that were there that at least one piece of this story is true, and that is that Saul had been killed and was gone. So the man continues to say, and I took the crown from his head, and I brought them to you. David took hold of his clothing, and he tore his clothing, as is customary to tear one's clothes upon hearing the news of the death of a great leader. of a king or any great leader or a relative. V'gam kol ha'anashim asher ito, and so did all of the people that were with him. Of course, it wasn't just the news of Saul's death that was very significant. It was also the news of Jonathan's death, who was such a close friend of David, and the news of the terrible loss at battle and the death of so many people of Israel. Vayispedu, and they lamented. Vayivku, and they cried. Vayatzumu, and they fasted out of Erev until the evening. Al Shaul, regarding Saul. V'al Yehona son Bano, and regarding his son Jonathan. V'al Am Adonai, and regarding the nation, the tragedy that had befallen to the nation of God. V'al Beis Yisrael, and the entire family of Israel. Hinaflu becharev, because they had fallen by the sword. The story continues after obviously the initial reaction of mourning and sadness over the tragedy that had occurred. The next thing David is going to do is go back to this messenger who gave him such a fishy story and was trying to ingratiate himself with the king, with who he assumed was the person who he assumed was going to be the king soon, and that's David, about this made-up story that he said. Vayomer David el Hanar, and so David now turned to the Nar. So after the mourning, etc., that had happened, David turned to this young man, Hamagid Lo, the one who had brought him the news. Emi ze'ata. And this is like an unusual, it's not unusual, it's a way of saying, like, where are you from? Like, where in the world do you come from? Like, what's your story? So, it's almost like saying, like, what's your intent here? What are you trying to accomplish? Vayomer, and he said, Ben ish ger amaleki anochi. I am the son of an Amalekite ger, an Amalekite ger. Now, ger, I've always translated this in the rabbinic sense of the word, which ger typically means a convert, one who converted. Now, it doesn't mean a convert in the same sense that we think of a convert today. But the word ger has two connotations. It means, number one, someone who both is a stranger in the sense that he or she was not a born Israelite, not a member of the Israelite family, but on the other hand, they're also a ger. They live among and attaching themselves and joining to the people. So he says to David, saying, I am originally an Amalekite, but my father and my family had decided to live among the people of Israel. But this person obviously has not changed his ways and adopted new behavior patterns than the bad ones that he had learned among the Amalekites based on what he was trying to do here. So Vayomer loved David, and so David said to him, Eich lo yareisa l'shloch yadcha. How is it possible that you didn't have the fear to go and send your hand l'shachetz es Mashiach Adonai, to destroy and kill he who was anointed by God to be the king over the people? Like, you are obviously have no allegiance and no feeling for being a part of the people of Israel. If under this situation you went ahead and struck down the king himself. So Vayikra, remember Saul's own assistant refused to do so. But this man claims that it was easy. Just, I killed him so he wouldn't suffer. Vayikra David la'achad me'hana'arim, and David called one of them and said, Vayomer, Gash, come here, Pigabo, strike him down. Vayakeo vayamos. He ordered his death and his execution, and he struck him down and killed him. Vayomer loved David, and David said to him as he lay there dying, Damcha al Roshecha, you are responsible for your own death. Ki ficha anavecha, because you yourself incriminated yourself, lamer, when you said, Anochi mosati et Mashiach Adonai, I killed he who was anointed by God to be the king. And this is David, after, of course, the initial reaction of mourning, this kind of a person didn't belong with the people of Israel, and certainly didn't, as he was trying to ingratiate himself with David, who was the king apparent, this certainly not reward him for this terrible action that he claimed to have done, which he didn't even do. The whole thing was a lie in the first place. But regardless, he did not deserve to play a part in the new kingdom, and he retained his Amalekite ways rather than join the people of Israel and the kind of kingdom and people that David would want to build his kingdom. This will end the first half of chapter 1. Looking forward to finishing this chapter together. In the next chapter, we will read of David's lamentation over the loss of Saul and Jonathan, and with the next one, we'll complete this chapter. Thank you so much for studying together. Looking forward to studying the rest of the book of Samuel and together with you.